Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are delighted to have you with us wherever on the globe you are. I am Alan Taylor of the Middle East Forum of Falmouth. I'd like to welcome you to the sixth and last lecture of our 2024 season. I do not work alone. I represent the committee comprised of Mark Schulman, Gary Jacobson, Samin Madani, Kathy Plazek, Andrew Davis, and Jim Altschul, and hopefully you. We'll speak more about that at the end. For those of you new to the Middle East Forum of Falmouth, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2006. Over the course of each season, we present a series of talks that represent a wide range of perspectives and opinions addressing complex issues facing the Middle East. Often, these opinions are contradictory. Some of them may even appear to be extreme. the Middle East Forum of Falmouth, does not endorse the opinions of any speakers. For those of you who have been with us for the season, you'll remember that this season began with examinations of relations with and politics in Qatar, Iran, and refreshing ideas about making peace in the Israel-Palestine region. In the last two lectures, we began our deep dive into Israel-Palestine with a thorough review about Hamas by Paulo Caridi. Who are they? How did they originate? What is their political and military agenda? In the last lecture by Noor Odeh, we had a Palestinian-centric view of the Palestinian zeitgeist. Specifically, Ms. Odeh explained the extent to which current Palestinian leadership ignores youth, despite their having a very significant proportion of the population, and that gets its information from very different sources used by the older cohort. Importantly, the youth are an active part of resistance. Noor also related her opinions about how the international community facilitates keeping the ossified, corrupt Palestinian leadership in position for fear of the outcome of re-elections in the Palestinian Authority and in Gaza. And she shared her view about the Israel-Palestine situation or conflict and refuted some of the challenges that the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA continue anti-Semitic education. Today, we go across the Israel-Palestine border and we'll hear from an Israeli General Nimrod Novik and his view of extending this forever war. I should point out that General Novik co-wrote what I consider a must-read informative review in Israel Policy Forum, along with the Palestinian and Egyptian and the Jordanian. Just to review the logistics for today's program, after our speaker's presentation, there'll be time for Q&A, questions and answers. Please use the Q&A feature of your screen, not the chat function, to ask questions. Questions can be submitted at any time during the session, and after the Q&A, we'll wrap up with a few brief comments and end the session around 1 o'clock. Now I'll turn the screen over to Jim Altschul. He will introduce General Novik, and he will also organize and aggregate the questions and present them to General Novik after the talk.
Alan, thank you. I am honored to introduce you to today's speaker, General Novik. Nimrod Novik was the policy advisor to the late Prime Minister Shimon Peres, a special ambassador of Israel, and an advisor to the Israeli NSC. He is a member of the Executive Committee of Commanders for Israel Securities, CIS, comprising over 500 former IDF generals, Mossad, Shin Bet, NSC, and foreign service equivalents. He is a fellow of the Israel Policy Forum, an American Jewish organization that provides policymakers and community leaders with policy analysis and educational resources. He's a senior fellow at the Economic Cooperation Foundation, the NGO that launched the Oslo process and has been involved in all phases of Israeli-Palestinian and regional negotiations. He has long been involved in back-channel diplomacy, employing a network of security and diplomatic contacts in the region and beyond. General Novik telegraphs that the trajectory of Israel's current policy spells trouble to Israelis, Palestinians, neighboring Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, as well as regional stability writ large. It involves a bleeding, open-ended occupation of Gaza that spills over to and further destabilizes the West Bank, potentially transforming the low-intensity fighting with Hezbollah into an all-out conflagration leading Arab peace partners to distance themselves from Israel while international isolation becomes the new normal. On the other hand, the trauma of October 7th and ensuing war turned the two-state solution from lip service to a policy directive in many capitals. The enormity of the crisis injected new energy into efforts to pacify the arena. Most significantly, it resulted in the Biden administration forging a powerful regional coalition willing to replace Israel and Gaza, offer Palestinians a peaceful alternative to the brutal Hamas ideology, and incorporate Israel into a common front to restrain Iran's and its proxies' violent, ambitious Israeli-Saudi normalization included. We are privileged to have General Novik with us today to shed more insight into Israeli life and politics, especially in these fraught times. Please provide a warm virtual welcome to General Novik.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Alan. I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts on what's going on. One may prepare a discussion on Israeli-Palestinian or Israeli-Arab affairs, maybe have notes prepared 24 hours in advance, and by the time you wake up in the morning, they become almost irrelevant. And this morning is no exception. I don't know how fast the news travels, but earlier this morning we had a very serious exchange of fire between ourselves and Hezbollah in the north. To be specific, I assume that some of you may have heard that weeks ago, Israel eliminated the chief of staff of Hezbollah at the heart of Beirut. And 2 days later, a leader of Hamas who was in Tehran on the inauguration of the new Iranian president was killed in a secure facility at the heart of Tehran. The Iranians attribute that to Israel as well. And both Iran and Hezbollah have committed to retaliate fiercely for those two senior assassinations, embarrassing on their own territory. And since then, everybody was waiting what it's going to look like, to the extent that President Biden dispatched, perhaps unprecedented in size, American naval and air forces into the region, two aircraft carrier task forces and nuclear submarine, F-22s and more, in order to deter both Iran and Hezbollah from triggering an all-out regional war. Whether this is what prevented them from having do so, or whether other considerations, but it has not happened. So there's no reason not to give credit to the American move. But last night, our intelligence community was able to provide leadership with specific information that by 5 a.m. local time today, Hezbollah was to launch a massive missile, ballistic missile, cruise missile, and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, into Israel, targeting both major swath of Israeli Northern Territory, which is not something new, but also high-valued strategic assets, targets in Israel, including a major security facility in the vicinity of Tel Aviv. That was to happen at 5 a.m. 20 minutes later, the Israeli Air Force, 100 aircrafts, F-35, F-16s, F-15s, struck Lebanese Hezbollah facilities in southern Lebanon, destroying reportedly 6,000 projectiles, Hezbollah later on did launch something like 320 projectiles into Israel. The overwhelming majority of which, and I'm talking about maybe 97%, have been intercepted and destroyed before they reach their target. Very few reached their target in the northern section of Israel, none further south. And the damage was there, but thank God, no one was killed. Injuries were less than a handful and very light. So that round is over. As we speak, the leader of Hezbollah is on the air. So I don't know what he's saying, but I can assume that given the failure of their attack or their intended attack, he is probably promising that this was just phase one. So yeah, the situation between us and Hezbollah has not changed. The intelligence, the accurate intelligence and operational success are impressive, just like previous ones, but that does not change the strategic equation. We are way over 300 days into the Gaza war. On day 2, Hezbollah started firing at Israel in sort of support of Hamas from the south. Our hostages are still there, more than 100, well over 300 days. Our population in the north and our population in the south is displaced by the tens of thousands and more. So the strategic equation has not changed. As I noted, I was forced to add this preamble, a very sad preamble, troubling one, to what I really wanted to share with you. So I'm going to my point number 1, and that is domestic context. I'd like to make 2 points about our domestic context in connection to the situation. One is there is a total disconnect between how Israelis view the Gaza war and how the world does. I don't have to tell you how the world does see it because you are the world. But I can tell you that Israelis are spared any awareness of the magnitude of casualties, the magnitude of devastating damage to civilian infrastructure in Gaza. We just are not privy to it because the Israeli media does not share any of it with the Israeli audience. I don't know if this is out of patriotism and they want to keep national morale high, or more cynically, considerations of ratings. Don't show people what they don't want to see. But whatever it is, Israelis don't see it, and this has policy consequences. When the public doesn't see what the world sees, the public doesn't understand world reaction. And as a result, any hostile reaction from the international community, be it grassroots, be it college campuses, be it international fora, is reduced to expressions of anti-Semitism. Now, there's no doubt that there is anti-Semitism there, and there's probably no doubt that our conduct in Gaza provides anti-Semites with ammunition. But to dismiss it all as sheer anti-Semitism is a wrong analysis, which might lead to wrong policies. The second point on, or just to conclude this one, what Israelis do see of Gaza is through the eyes of the Israeli fighting troops. And indeed, our troops are fighting bravely, professionally. This is no genocide by a long shot. And what Israelis see is just what through the eyes of the Israeli soldier. This is reinforced by the fact that we as a nation are not mentally, are not in August. We are in October 23. We are still on the second and third and fourth days after the Hamas atrocities of October 7th. And that's because the pain of the hostages and the pain of their families, the pain of those who were butchered, adults in front of their children and children in front of their parents in the South on October 7th, those who were burned alive, the pain of those, the stories are being told on a daily basis. I don't want to say 24/7 because it is not, but it is certainly on a daily basis that we are reminded very vividly of the pain of those who were the victims, the pain of those who survived, and the heroism of the few who came to the rescue, risking their lives. So that's point number one. Point number two about the domestic situation is that Israelis are totally unaware of what a war with Hezbollah is going to look like. An all-out conflagration, not the low intensity that has been going on for the last 10 months. Those who are speaking about it, and many do, retired generals, commentators on media, military correspondents, and so on and so forth, government spokesmen, they all talk about the fact that the war with Lebanon or the war with Hezbollah is going to be different from the war with Hamas. But that one sentence, it's going to be different, is far too amorphic for Israelis to appreciate what does it mean. What does it mean that Hezbollah has 160,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel, and if launched, the homes of those who are rooting for a war in Lebanon are going to be destroyed? There is no notion of the magnitude, the scale of devastation and casualties on both sides that is going to take place if we are in a full-fledged war with Hezbollah. And when I see 60% of Israelis telling the government, you got to do it, even though the war in the South is still going on, you got to do it. You got to teach Hezbollah a lesson. You got to change the situation, the equation in the North. And the only way to do it is through major military offensive. I think that these people don't know what they are wishing for. And again, when public opinion is not well informed on an issue of such consequences, politicians might make wrong decisions. So that's what I wanted to say about the domestic context in Israel, which is quite troubling. By the way, it just reminded me of a footnote. There are two groups that refer to me as generals, the Egyptian intelligence and my hosts here. So no, I'm not a general, I'm Nimrod Novik. The second point that I wanted to make, and that was mentioned, was summarized very accurately by Jim in the opening, is that Israel is at a critical crossroad, like never that I can recall, and I've been in this business for many decades. Sometimes cliches reflect reality very accurately. And when I say a critical crossroad, I mean it in the most meaningful sense of the word. On the one hand, our war in Gaza is dragging aimlessly for several months now. This is probably the most justified war, was the most justified war when it was launched. When Hamas killed over 1,200 Israeli citizens, civilians, children, women and men, elderly, and kidnapped well over 200 and kept them in the tunnels in Gaza, there was no way in the world and no country in the world that would not retaliate fiercely. And after we've had rounds of violence with Hamas, since it took over Gaza in 2006, we had a round in 2008 and in 2011 and 2012 and 14 and 18 and 21 and 23. But none like the atrocities that we witnessed on October 7th, 23. And it was clear that the old strategy of a round of violence, a ceasefire, understandings, short while of tranquility until Hamas finds that the time is right for yet another round, that's over. And we got to undo Hamas control of Gaza and its ability to threaten us yet again. That objective was accomplished in the early 3 to 4 months. Since then, the war is being dragged on under a slogan which is empty and shallow, which is called total victory. Total victory is not something that the political echelon, the leadership of the country, provides the army or the armed forces as guidance for policy. There's no way to translate total victory into an action plan. What is total victory? Until you kill the last Hamas operative who is hiding in his mother's home after his unit has been destroyed, is that total victory? Do you really get there and kill all the civilians en route in order to get to the last one? No, it's not. The objective, as the IDF understood it, Israel Defense Force understood it, was to undo Hamas governance and demolish most of its military formation. And that was accomplished long ago. And since then, the war is dragging on. As a result, the war in the north with Hezbollah is going on. No intensity, but war nonetheless, with casualties on both sides. And indeed, Hezbollah has made it clear that once there is ceasefire in the south, there'll be a ceasefire in the north. Yet, it's not happening. At the same time, what's happening in Gaza is affecting stability in the West Bank. And Palestinians in the West Bank are rallying around Hamas, not because of what they did on October 7th, which they deny, but because they consider Hamas as the only one who is doing something against the Israeli occupation. And if that continues, then we are sentenced to an open-ended occupation of Gaza, bleeding one on both sides, destabilizing the West Bank, destabilizing the region, destabilizing peace treaties between Israel and Arab countries near, Egypt and Jordan, and far, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco, and sentence normalization with Saudi Arabia, which was so close on October 6th, sentences to the files of missed opportunities. And yet, there is another option. and that is to transform this entire tragedy and trauma for both peoples into a turning point in the region. It was encapsulated in an op-ed published by President Biden in November and pursued by his administration since, and it comes down to an opportunity for a three-way win for Israel as an exit from the current crisis. One win is 5 Arab countries willing to shoulder responsibility for Gaza, assisting the Palestinian Authority in regaining control of the Gaza Strip and serving there as long as necessary until the Palestinian Authority is rejuvenated. Sorry about that, a bit of a cold. Is rejuvenated and is strengthened to the point that it can on its own control both the West Bank and Gaza. The second is offer Palestinians writ large and a peaceful alternative to the Hamas brutal ideology by offering them a political horizon of a credible path towards statehood next to Israel to rally around. And the third win is to incorporate Israel into a potent regional coalition led by the US that stands up to Iran and its meddling in the region. This can really be transformative. The initiative does not come with any insurance policy that it will succeed, and third parties can derail any good intention. But nonetheless, giving it a chance can really transform our security situation and regional stability and regional dynamics. Those Arab countries who are willing to participate in that endeavor obviously have conditions. And their conditions are basically the following. One, obviously, a ceasefire, end of the war in Gaza, which means the hostages are coming back, and there is ceasefire in the south and ceasefire with Hezbollah in the north. The second condition is that the IDF withdraws from Gaza as their troops are phased in. Their third condition is they refuse to come into Gaza as occupiers. And in order not to be occupiers, they have to be invited by and coordinated with the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, which is the Palestinian Authority. Their next condition is they want to make sure that when the donor community pumps billions of dollars to rehabilitate and redevelop Gaza, it does not go up in flame of another round. And the only way to increase prospects of avoiding another round is if this entire project, if you want to call it, is done within the context of a credible peace process. That process may take years to mature, but it has to be credible, it has to be irreversible, it has to convince Palestinians, Israelis, and others alike that this time it is for real. It is with great regret that I have to report to you that the current Israeli government is not likely to accept those conditions, and absent those conditions, we are doomed to the troubling, failed, prolonged crisis of the first option that I suggested. My final point is the failure of our intelligence community on the eve of October 7th and the operational failure of the initial 24 hours notwithstanding, Israel is a very strong country. It is the strongest country within 1,000 miles of Jerusalem in any direction. Obviously, when you go to sleep and you don't notice those who are coming to kill you, then it's going to be painful. And that's what happened to us on October 7th. But in terms of the strength of the country, the strength of society, the strength of our technological infrastructure, of our economy, we're a very strong country. And we are able to meet our challenges. But even the strongest of country of the size of small Israel cannot go it alone. The Iranian strategy of encircling Israel with its proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, and Iran itself, present us with a circle of hostility which can only be met by a joint effort of all those in the region who feel threatened by it, and they are numerous. It's Saudi Arabia, it's United Arab Emirates, it's Jordan and Egypt, it's Bahrain, it's Morocco, and it's quite a few others. Israel has a tremendous opportunity that I hope will survive our internal deliberations, because everything at the moment, exit strategy from Gaza, bringing back the hostages, stabilizing the northern front, rejuvenating the Palestinian Authority and joining a regional coalition, all of it, to my great regret, is stuck in Jerusalem. And I will stop here.
Well, thank you very much for an engaging, insightful, thoughtful presentation. Learned a lot from it. We have some questions. First of all, following October 7th, did anyone in Israeli officialdom propose an alternative to military invasion and conquest of Gaza? And if so, what was proposed?
You want me to take them one at a time?
I'll leave
Sure.
it to you.
Sure. No. Nobody did, but this good question deserves a more detailed answer. I would say that there were primarily two reasons why not. One was rational and the other one was emotional. And I'm not sure which one prevailed in the early weeks. The rational was what I alluded to earlier, which is finally, well, let me back step a little bit. As Jim mentioned, I belong to a group of 530 Israeli generals and equivalent from the top of the Israeli security and diplomatic arena, retirees. In 2018, we published, and you can see it on our website, something that we called an alternative strategy for Gaza. As early as then, we reached the conclusion that the government strategy of the time, which began in 2009 or so, was leading to a disaster. None of us can take credit for having anticipated the atrocities of October 7th. But nonetheless, we understood that it was going to something far more substantial than the occasional rounds of violence between Hamas and ourselves. And we suggested an alternative strategy, which was not embraced. But if you will, you can find some of its elements in what is now recognized as the Biden initiative. Which means we all understood that the previous strategy was a failed strategy and leading to a disaster. That became a consensus post-October 7th. Now, what we suggested at the time was a diplomatic initiative, that diplomatic, economic, and other means initiative that was to change dynamics in Gaza and beyond. I will not belabor that point now. But in the wake of October 7th, there was a consensus that Israel cannot tolerate Hamas continued control of Gaza, and that we have to put an end to it. And the only way to do so, that was the consensus, was via military means. What was missing was an end game, an exit strategy, a portrayal of the morning after, for the government to tell the IDF, this is the picture of the morning after. This is what we want to see. I mean, when we finish whatever it is that we have to do, or you, IDF, complete your mission, who is going to govern Gaza? Who's going to take care of the civilian needs? Who's going to take care of internal security? Who's going to take care of external security? Who will rebuild? The prime minister refused to hold a discussion of that issue, which should have informed the military operation from day one. Until today, he refuses to do so, even though we at Commanders, the entire security establishment, and the US security establishment and administration were urging him to do so. Basically, the Americans came and said, look, we made the same mistake in Iraq and in Afghanistan. We did not design the morning after when we walked in. And look where it got us. Learn from our mistake. Netanyahu, for his political reasons, for personal issues, refused to do so to this very day. So I digested a bit. So there was a consensus that that a military operation was essential in order to get rid of Hamas regime. However, I must confess that even in the most rational circles, and even among the battle-hardened generals who are supposed to do this analysis cold and sober, there was an emotional element. Israelis were driven by a combination of revenge, fear in the public, the emotional dimension, I don't think, was less potent than the rational considerations in leading to this consensus that that's the way to go.
Thank you. You at the beginning of your remarks, you talked about how the Israeli media is not reporting on the carnage in Gaza. We have a question that from one of our listeners who asks, there are a lot of Israelis traveling abroad. When they're traveling abroad, they can certainly be exposed to what's being reported in the media as well as near. I'm going to jump in, even if the Israeli media isn't covering it. A lot of people in Israel who can get the New York Times or the Financial Times or Le Monde or whatever online. Aren't some of those people aware of it and sharing it with their neighbors? And also, the hostage families have been protesting all the time Uh, isn't some of this information getting around just how serious the situation is in Gaza, notwithstanding the silence of the Israeli media?
I appreciate whoever asked the question, and I stand corrected, and let me qualify. Um, you know, the political junkies in this country are as well informed as anyone else. As the person who asked the question pointed out, we watch CNN and we watch MSNBC, and when we have no choice, we also sometimes watch Fox. But we have BBC and we have Sky News and New York Times and Washington Post. I'm a subscriber to both and more. But that's a thin layer of society. I can tell you that when I no longer do, but when I tried to share with my neighbors who are not in that circle what I know about what's going on there, the response was beyond anger. The self-righteousness is overwhelming. How can you tell me about their suffering? Who cares about their suffering when we are going through this, that, and the other? It's one thing to know that the number of casualties is 40,000 in Gaza, and that some 10,000 of them are children. And it's another thing to internalize it through the images that are broadcasted by international media, which Israelis are not exposed to. So yeah, a certain circle in Israel is aware, but the overwhelming majority of public is not.
Well, quite frankly, that's not entirely different from the situation in the U.S. That only a limited segment of the population in this country is reading the New York Times or watching CNN, so it's not entirely different. You place most of the blame on Israeli leadership, but the Islamic jihadist leadership of Hezbollah and Iran continue their goal of the destruction of the Jewish state. If the region does explode, is there a point when Israel would use nuclear weapons?
Let me deal with these two segments. Let me split it into two issues. I'm an Israeli. I'm an Israeli patriot. I was born here. My father was in the Israeli underground that formed the country before the establishment of the state. He's one of the founders of the Israeli intelligence community and served there all his life. I raised my children here, and I raised my grandchildren here. As an Israeli, I have no expectations of Hamas leaders, jihad leaders, or Iranian leaders. I have every expectation of my leader. They are the ones who have to do everything to secure the people of Israel. And when I put the blame on my government, it's not that I absolve the hostiles of responsibility. But, to tell you that Hamas is responsible for the atrocities of October 7th, of course. Barbaric. That Iran funded them and provided them with training and ammunition, of course. That Hezbollah is arming against us and not in defense of Lebanon. Israel has no claim against Lebanon on any issue. So, to put the blame on the bad guys is an easy cop-out for me as an Israeli. The question for me always is, could my government have done better? And my answer is 100% yes. For 15 years, my prime minister has led a policy of weakening the Palestinian moderates in the form of the Palestinian Authority and strengthening Hamas. He was the one who asked Qatar to fund Hamas. His head of Mossad traveled secretly to Qatar to urge them to fund Hamas at the tune of $35 million a month for years. That money produced the tunnels and the weapons that were used and are still are used against us. So should I come to complain to the fact that at the head of Hamas there is a brutal killer with all kind of religious fantasies about how he will bring about the end of Israel, which will never happen? No, that's not where I am. I am in arguing to my prime minister, where were you for 15 years when we were saying that that strategy was wrong and will end up in a disaster? So yes, I look at Jerusalem first before I look anywhere else. As to the nuclear issue, let's start by saying that Israel has never confessed to having that kind of capability. And within that framework, I would say that I don't envision a moment where Israel's conventional capabilities are not going to be enough to defend our country, and that we will have to resort to something else, whether we have it or not. I would say that if we follow the wrong route, the pain of defending ourselves is going to be much greater. If we follow the opportunity, the regional opportunity presented by Biden and by the regional leaders who signed on to it, defending our country is going to be that much easier.
Thank you. What is or could be Iran's role in negotiating a ceasefire in Gaza? And is it in Iran's interest to try to encourage a ceasefire?
October 7th had many effects on us Israelis. One of them is to be a little more humble in trying to suggest what another leader has in mind. Our failure to anticipate the attack was a humbling experience in that regard. So with that caveat in mind, I will nonetheless try to suggest some thoughts about where Iran stands on the issue. And I'm basing it now not just on a hunch, but on looking at Iran's conduct over the last 10 months, including in the last 24 hours. And what we've seen is that Iran was not willing to risk its investment in Hezbollah in order to support Hamas. And Iran restrained Hezbollah's behavior so as not to trigger an all-out Israeli response. Iran's investment in Hezbollah is not in order to control Lebanon. That's a bonus. The investment is meant to create a strategic equation with Israel. Iran knows, and it relates to the previous question maybe also, Iran knows of Israel's capabilities. And Iran does not have I'm talking about conventional for now. And Iran doesn't have an answer to our capabilities. The damage that Israel can cause in Iran is beyond comparison to what Iran might be able to do here. And in order to deter Israel from striking at Iran's nuclear facilities, it invested in Hezbollah as the deterrence. Hezbollah's 160,000 rockets and missiles are to serve Israel, to cause Israel a second and third and fourth thought before it launches an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. And that was last night, demonstrated last night as well, when Hezbollah intended to launch a major attack, as I described earlier, at 5 a.m. But even that was just a fraction of their capabilities. And even the choice of targets, as Israeli intelligence have managed to identify, and I hope that they got it right, even the targets were designed to prevent an all-out escalation. They knew that Israel would retaliate if they succeed, but it was limited enough to not trigger an all-out conflagration. And I would say that that's probably as much as a result of Iran pressure on Hezbollah to not go too far, as it is Hezbollah's own domestic considerations, given other Lebanese factions' pressure on them not to trigger a war that will devastate Lebanon. Iran is irrelevant to the hostage negotiations. I would say that just about nobody is relevant to the hostage negotiation except of one man. It used to be two, and we killed one of them. And that was the head of the military wing of Hamas, Mohammed Deif, that was killed, and the overall head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, who is in a tunnel somewhere under Gaza. All the mediators, be it Egyptians or Qataris, be it Hamas outside leadership that serve as liaisons, are just mailboxes. They deliver messages to Sinwar and bring back his answers. And because he's very careful that Israel will not detect his location, he's not using any technology that has a signal. So it's all in notes and messengers who come in and out, and that's why it takes days to give him new information and days to get his answer to them. And most of the pressure, most of the outside pressure on Hamas has very little relevance to his considerations. And today in Israel, you have two schools, in Israel intelligence community and beyond. You have two schools. One school that says that he will not go for a deal until, because he's waiting for a regional war, that he was hoping that Israel will behave foolishly enough to trigger one, and that Iran will have no choice but to go for it and use all its forces in the region, from Yemen to Lebanon to Iran itself. And with general regional war was his original intention when he launched October 7th. He's been disappointed several times that it has not happened. But again, in this school of Israeli intelligence and beyond, the assumption is that he thought that when we killed the Hezbollah chief of staff in Beirut and allegedly killed the Hamas leader in Tehran, that we were stupid enough to trigger that kind of a war. And that school of thought assumes that last night or this morning, he was very disappointed that did not happen even today. The other school says that he's just looking, he needs some breathing space in order to regroup, reorganize, try and get some more communication with his dispersed operatives all over the Gaza Strip, whose formations and communication equipment have long been destroyed, and therefore that he is interested, even in a short, just the deal on the table right now has 3 phases, and that he will be happy even just with phase 1 that has some 30, that has a certain segment of Israeli hostages released, and 6 weeks cessation of ceasefire, and that he's eager to get even that in order to regroup, reorganize, and see where does he go from here. I don't know which school is correct, but I do know, and it brings me back to my previous answer, as long as my prime minister plays games with the terms of the deal, we will not know where Yahya Sinwar is, because time and again we change the term. Once there is an agreement on his side, we change the terms, which for me as an Israeli is beyond unthinkable. When there is an opportunity to bring back hostages, and my prime minister changes the terms and start the negotiations all over again.
I think we have time for one more question. Do you think it's possible on the Palestinian side, between the people in Gaza, the people in the West Bank, the people in the PA, the people in Hamas, to reach that's enough of a consensus so that it'd be possible to reach an agreement? And you earlier in your prepared remarks, you were talking about the Palestinian Authority as the legitimate authority, which it is, but from everything I've read and heard, the Palestinian Authority doesn't have an awful lot of credibility. And what is it? The Abbas is in the 15th year of a 4-year term, or whatever is that. So do you think it's possible for them to reach a consensus and for there to be a viable negotiating partner for the Palestinians?
Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon. I don't think that in Israel you're likely. I'm not making a symmetry, not at all. But not even in Israel, you will not find a consensus for a deal with the Palestinians anytime soon. I'm talking about a long process, and I think Washington got it right when the new mantra is a credible path towards a 2-state solution. Bringing the parties to the table today is a prescription for failure. Now, yeah, the Palestinian Authority is totally discredited. It is corrupt. It is authoritarian. It is totally detached from its own population. But I'm old enough to remember different days when the Palestinian Authority was very popular, when the Palestinian security agencies were highly respected by the public because they were viewed as the symbol of a state in being. But when the Oslo process, designed for 5 years, and we are in the year 22, and the Palestinian Authority does not deliver on statehood and does not deliver services efficiently to the people and is corrupt, it's no wonder that Palestinians are looking for an alternative. I remember Abu Mazen, the Palestinian leader, the president. I mean, the picture is too small over my shoulder, but that's Abu Mazen at lunch in my home, at dinner in my home. We were very close, and we were working very closely on the peace process. I'm talking about until Rabin was assassinated in 1995. And there were some segments later on. But with time, the Palestinian Authority lost legitimacy, lost credibility, and the Palestinian public is looking elsewhere. I think that changing the dynamics will take a long time. I don't believe in the theory that Palestinians are genetically deformed and therefore they don't want peace and security and dignity and for mothers to know that their children are safe and get good schooling and a hopeful future. I think there are people just like any other people. perhaps more educated than some others in the region on average. Human resources there are impressive. I have common language with so many of them. They yearn for the same thing that we do, which doesn't mean it's going to be easy or fast. But I'm not looking at our relationship with the Palestinians from a Palestinian perspective. I look at it from an Israeli perspective. And I believe that if Israel does not do what it takes to stop the slide towards a bleeding one-state reality, where 7 million Palestinians fight 7 million Jews, because that's what we have between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. If these two people do not start separating instead of getting into each other's nerves and fighting and killing each other, if we don't give them hope, we are not going to have security. And therefore, we need to structure a policy that is security-based for a gradual separation between the two peoples until the stars are aligned and we are lucky enough to have a credible leader on the other side and a credible leader on our side and a credible leader in Washington that is willing and able to engage and bring us to a completely different reality.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so we're so grateful to you, Nimrod, as you prefer to be called, for taking the time from your difficult and challenging schedule to be with us this afternoon, especially today. It's a day full of events there. We are very grateful for your deep and critical analysis and for giving us a more complete appreciation of the complexities, dangers, and options for going forward in Israel-Palestine. Now, for the audience, if you have not done so, you can make a contribution to keep these free public lectures coming. You can see on my slide here that donations and information to prior lectures can be gotten at www.mef.world. Your donations allow us to provide these free lectures, free open lectures. If you'd like to see archived lectures, you can go to that website as well. And certainly, as I mentioned to you, we'd like this to be as much your seminar series as ours. We welcome your feedback, your suggestions, and volunteers, and write to us at info.mef.world@gmail.com. Finally, let's give final thanks to General Novick again for an enlightening talk and perspectives. And wherever you are, we thank all of you for participating in this webinar. And with that, I'll offer final thank you to Jim Altschul for hosting and to General Novick for the illuminating lecture. And have a good rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your summer. And we'll see you in 2025. Be sure you're in touch. Thank you so much.